Right, so this here is meant to be my new Alienware gaming PC, which I'm very excited about because I've never owned an Alienware gaming PC. I've worked on them plenty, but I've never had the opportunity to actually own one of these computers. So when I noticed this thing come up on eBay and no one was really bidding, I thought, you know what, why don't we wait till the last second, we'll chuck in a cheeky bid and we'll find out what we can actually get it for. So for slightly north of £40, I have bought what is an Alienware gaming PC. It was listed as Alienware Gaming PC, Alienware X51. So why don't we get this open and find out just what is the cheapest Alienware PC I could buy actually like. Where is it? Oh, we've got the keyboard. Missing a key. That's quite a nice keyboard actually. I'm keeping that. Oh, we've got a note. We've got a note. Fresh install, but disk percentage at 100%, so selling as spares or repairs. Password 123456. Interesting. Here is our computer. Have we got anything else in here? Yes, we do. So I've got a peripherals upgrade included, which isn't too bad. Well, it looks like an Alienware. It says Alienware on it, and we've got a Core i3 inside. Taking a little bit of a beating in shipping there. Let's get it open and see what it looks like inside real quick. Something or... it unclips and slides. Interestingly enough, it's running a PCIe riser to what looks to be looks like an OEM card. Might not be a too bad card actually either. I can't see what's written on it. All looks fairly standard in a very funky Alienware way. At least it's not looking too bad inside. So that's some good news. Let's go plug it in, see what it actually does. It's an odd form factor, this PC. It really is the peak of... What is this one? This sort of looks like a 2013, 2014 style. I'm really fond of this design because what it looks like all they've done is they've taken the classic Alienware design and made it small. And I just hope this turns on. So what do we actually need? We need display, power as well. Where is the power button? Is it just the Alienware bit? No. Is it this one? It's that one. And the fans are quite noisy. It's turned on. Alienware. It is a little bit of a shame that with the advent of mini computers, you don't really need SFF PCs anymore. They're still cool. And you never know. I mean, Alienware made some fairly okay gaming PCs back in the day. I mean, anyone that didn't really know too much about computers, what they wanted was an Alienware PC. A lot of people didn't realise that specifications mattered. Right, does the keyboard work? It does. So from down here I can hear the hard drive. It doesn't sound very healthy. And we've been booting to Windows now for a little while. So we'll see if it actually makes it into Windows, and then maybe we'll help it out and throw in a cheap SSD or something. We may be here a little while waiting for it to boot. We'll see if it does eventually make it to Windows. It has gone to another update screen and it is now restarting. There is the slimmest chance that it is now done updated. Just want to know what the specifications are. Mouse is quite nice actually. I mean, I don't know if I'd spend 40 quid on a broken mouse and keyboard by itself, but so far I'm loving my little Alienware. It's taken a couple of hours to get to this point, but it's working very slowly. They've already got Unigine on here. That's how you know this is someone that likes to benchmark properly. Oh, it has got Wi-Fi. It's got built-in Wi-Fi. What are the specifications? Can we see? So we've got an i3 4150 at 3.5 gigahertz, 6 gigs of RAM, one 4 gig, one 2 gig. I was thinking, how do they get a 3 gigabyte stick? A GeForce GTX 745, which was the lowest end version of Maxwell you could get from Nvidia. 4 gigabytes of VRAM. One thing you can do, or used to be able to do on Windows 10 to get rid of disk usage, is turn off notifications. And for some unknown reason, that drops disk usage. Let's just whack in an SSD, throw a bit more RAM into it, because 6 gigs is... upgrading to 6 gigs is what I did back when GTA 5 came out, which is probably the era this is from. Why don't we throw an SSD in this so it's actually a bit more pleasant to use? See, I don't think adding an SSD really counts as cheating with something like this, because SSDs are so cheap now, and it's just to make my life 10 times easier. Otherwise, these videos do take forever. Ah, it lifts up. You actually do get 2 6-pins for the graphics card, so that's upgradable. And then the hard drive is one more screw, just the one screw we got. loud thunk. That is the hard drive out. Just clip an SSD in here. Someone's already upgraded the RAM, but maybe it's just worth us just chucking in a little bit more. Keep in mind, this is the stuff that I bought from China that cost about £4 for 16 gigs. So I'm liking this whole riser setup. There we go. That was a lot quicker. That was around 20 seconds. This i3 is a lot more snappy than the last one we looked at. Seeing GeForce 700 this far back, scary. And I believe this is the final driver these will ever be getting, at least in terms of optimization. July 31st. Oddly appropriate we're looking at this now. Well, let's let those download and then we'll see how things go. I mean, so far, this is working very quickly. The mouse is a little bit naff. How's the i3? The i3 is working overtime, to be fair, but it is a 4150, which was actually one of the best i3s I think they sold back then. All that's left to do is install some graphics drivers and see how it's holding up. Maybe we'll try and install some games. We're definitely going to use this as a computer. This is probably going to be my computer for the week. So let's find out how it goes. I'm not that fussed about an Alienware branded mouse. It's cool, but it's at the end of the day, it's just a Dell mouse with a sticker on it. Honestly, it's actually really nice to use. I mean, the main limit was that dying hard drive. This dying hard drive. So yeah, 6 gigs would have been fine just sitting at the desktop with a few applications, but it doesn't leave much headroom for us. So at least we've got a bit of headroom now. The Wi-Fi adapter in here is perfect. The form factor's good. It looks cool. It's a bit beaten up. It's an Alienware! That's cool! I'm really enjoying how cinematic this frame rate is. Maybe I had my hopes a little bit too high for things, but it's very quiet. Yeah, maybe low-end Maxwell really isn't up to it in 2025. We will have to look at the graphics card itself at some point. But for now, let's see how it is as a full system. That's what we're really curious about. Yeah, performance is... there's a massive GPU bottleneck here. So run Skydiver in the background, and then we'll whack an overclock on here. So can we increase our core clock by 135? Memory by 250. There are graphics cards with little headroom, and then there is the GTX 745. Which has no headroom. Not that it is a huge claim to fame, but given this is the metrics for, well, what can only be this Alienware computer, this is now the best one ever made thanks to an overclock. Now scoring the best score ever done at 799 points. That's really not great. That's actually pretty appalling, but we've made some progress. So why don't we carry on with the rest of the video? So the PC we actually have here is actually the Alienware X51 Revision 2, which seems to be quite a bit more sought after than the original revision, coming in based on Haswell. Now this version here is a remarkably low-end version, and don't worry, we will be covering the options and the history later because I've been doing an awful lot of digging on this machine, but we've got an i3-4150, which wasn't a bad i3 chip, and as you're going to see today, does actually have a few architectural differences over the earlier Sandy and Ivory Bridge versions that mean it's a bit more usable in 2025. It's only got 2 cores and 4 threads at 3.5 GHz, but still at the end of the day, that should be just enough to get us by. The graphics card is the mysterious and elusive GTX 745, where if you thought Nvidia released some bad cards, well, the GTX 745 is probably the first card they released that really did not deserve that GTX name. It's got 4GB of RAM, admittedly DDR3, but it's just not great. Now, out of the box, this machine would have come with 6GB of DDR3 RAM, but given that it is 2025 and RAM is so cheap now, DDR3 costs next to nothing. You can order it from China for £2 for 8GB, that's about what we paid for this, so I've whacked in 16GB of DDR3 to try and make things a bit more fair. Now, in terms of storage, it does come with 1TB of dying hard drive space, and we are running Windows 11 IoT today, because when I was testing between Windows 11 IoT and Windows 10, well, really there was no performance difference, so we are going to run the latest version of Windows just to show that this machine can do it. And this is of course running on a cheap SSD that I've just whacked in here to make my life easier. It uses a laptop charger as the power supply, which means that you can get these things specified up to 330 watts, but in our case it is running the most basic 130 watt power supply. I paid just £44 for this machine today, but in reality, these things go for a lot more. I've seen these things sell for upwards of £150 purely because it isn't a Revision 1 machine. Before we get into that rather interesting history though, this thing, well, you saw me try and do some overclocking, and admittedly we did see a decent chunk of performance increase overall, but that still doesn't mean the GTX 745 in here is actually any good. I went through all of my 3D Mark results, and the only two cards that I could find that were actually somewhat comparable to this were the weird China exclusive, well they're not meant to be China exclusive, they're meant to be a worldwide release, but good luck finding one, GT1010 DDR4 and GT1010 GDDR5. And it goes to show, the moment that a card has actual VRAM, even if it is a terrible card on paper, well, it just completely decimates this 745 card. So don't worry, we will actually take this out and look at the 745 at some point, but I was already very, very underwhelmed by the difference we could make overclocking the chip. Now, the history on this PC did actually get me a little bit curious and doing a little bit of digging, because when it comes to the different revisions of these Alienware PCs, they do actually have quite the cult following, and from using it for a while I understand why. The form factor is just straight up strange, but they've managed to essentially take a small form Dell, make it a gaming PC, and actually make it capable of running real graphics cards. And for people that don't think that they did, well, I've been tracking down the original website listings to try and find just how much these things cost and just what you could get specified in them. Now, it does seem that the GTX 745 in these machines was not the original option, as upon their launch in 2014, they came with an even worse card, so all the same specifications you see here, but instead it comes with the GTX 645 graphics card. And you could spec this all the way up to a cost of $1,100, where you would get instead the Radeon R9 270X, which would have been probably quite a chunk nicer to use. Did go ahead and modernise things, with it seeming to be around February 2015 that they decided to start offering an upgraded graphics card as standard, which tended to replace even the graphics cards available in the higher end options. No longer was the GTX 670 or the 270X Radeon your go-to choice with anything up to a Core i7. Most of these were sold shipped out with a standard GTX 745, and I did manage to find an internal Dell page from their campaign listing offering this and showing it as an option. Now don't get me wrong, there's also an option on there for a triple GTX 980 graphics card machine with the Area 51, and that sounds absolutely immense, but for your average person, you were looking at a GTX 745. Now, trying to do a bit more digging, it does seem in the later months they did begin to offer some more choices, completely dropping the Radeon options, and now you had the choice of a 745, 750 Ti, the R9 270 in the top end's form, at least for a couple of months, and then the 760 Ti in the extreme version, which I'm fairly sure now is worse than the R9 270 would have been. But either way, it was just a complete throwback to the past, going through these websites and seeing the options from what could be described by many the heyday of actual budget PC gaming. Either way, it was really interesting to see. I mean, they were offering tablets for sale with this, just anything they could bundle in to get you to buy an Alienware PC. Today though, prices are absolutely insane, with these things selling anywhere from £100 up to £400 depending on the specifications. So it does seem like people really want these machines. In fact, Dell actually kept modernising the page for the Revision 2 on special order until just 3 years ago. So now we understand just how this Alienware PC ended up with its strange set of specifications. But at the end of the day, occasionally these machines do go for bargain prices like what I paid today. So the question is How well do they actually perform when you take what is a cheap pre-built used gaming PC, admittedly one from a brand that has a questionable reputation when it comes to specifications, and find out just how well does it perform in 2025 when you throw it up into the benchmarks? Starting off the benchmarks, we have GTA 5 Enhanced Edition running with normal settings mostly and HBAO for the shadows and lighting. And it looked pretty decent even in the 720p resolution, and I do have to give the game credit here, it had some very smooth frame times. In fact, in terms of the overall frame rate, we were seeing anywhere from 50 to 60 FPS most of the time, and it would only ever stray slightly beneath the 50 FPS mark when not much was actually going on. So it's nice to see that GTA 5 Enhanced Edition, well, it runs nicely, it supports the graphics card in here, which is a very basic card still, and we can actually get away with a decent 720p experience. To give people an idea of how the game runs the standard legacy version of the game though, which would have been the version you would have been playing on this back in the day, well, it seems to run pretty fine with normal and high settings plus PCSS shadows, which look pretty decent. Admittedly, they're no match for the new Enhanced Edition, but still, it does try and bring a little bit of life to the legacy version. And we saw 63 FPS on average, with 1% lows down to 55 FPS, so for actually playing GTA 5 when it came out on launch, it's doing absolutely fine. What's more interesting though, is that the Core i3 in this machine was also dealing with it absolutely fine, and after my experience from a couple of weeks ago using a Sandy Bridge i3, I really didn't expect this much of an uplift over it just being a couple of generations newer, but it does seem like those Haswell i3s are holding up relatively okay. When moving into the online version of GTA 5 though, well, we did see our frame rate pretty much slashed in half. It was still playable, but changing some settings down lower doesn't really do anything. It just seems to be with this set of parts, well, the game does struggle to achieve high utilization, which is an issue this game has in higher player lobbies. We've gone over it countless times. Either way, it was still playable and you could maintain the same settings you had in single player, you'd just be experiencing a 30 FPS experience rather than a 60 FPS one. But GTA Online is still, to this day, playable on what is a pre-built entry-level Alienware PC. Counter-Strike 2 was a little bit underwhelming, because this machine back in the day would have been pretty decent for CSGO, but it does seem with the advent of Counter-Strike 2, even with low settings in 720p, we never really saw all too much of a competitive frame rate. I'm sure for some casual gameplay this would be absolutely fine, but when it comes to actual competitive matches, well, the i3 really does become quite the limit, and doesn't really want to go much higher than 70 to 90 FPS, with some odd stuttering in places. Now, it wasn't too prevalent, and it was still playable, keep in mind, but it just wasn't a competitive experience. So it does seem like if you wanted to get away with some competitive gaming, maybe a used Alienware is not a good option. When it comes to Cyberpunk 2077, I thought there's no way this machine will even launch it. I mean, it is still quite underpowered for it, but utilising low settings in 384p thanks to the magic of FSR, we saw that the game would achieve 34 FPS on average with 1% lows down to 25. And you're probably seeing this and thinking, wow, that actually seems almost playable, and it doesn't look too bad, at least not compared to a native 384p image, but still, when we actually went into gameplay, is where things mostly fell apart, with 24 FPS on average and 1% lows down to 18 FPS, and the game would hitch and stutter when loading in lots and you were in a busy environment. It's still just a shame that there's just no way of getting this to run, but then again, I really think it is the graphics card limiting us here, because I think the i3 could just about eke out a playable frame rate. When it came to BeamNG, I was probably being a tad too optimistic by trying to target slightly higher settings than this. Originally I started with medium and then medium and high, and it just wasn't playable, at least not in the intensive maps. We had to drop a few settings down to low, and in 720p we did manage to see 43 FPS on average, with really nice frame times to go with it. The Core i3 manages the game absolutely fine, any physics effects, and you can actually add a decent amount of traffic before the frame rate starts to tank. The only thing is though, this is about as good as it's going to get. I mean, you can play simpler maps and see over 60 FPS, but if you want to see 60 FPS here, it's going to be a struggle even with settings lower than this.
Red Dead Redemption 2, well, this was actually quite easy to benchmark for once, because although we actually have a useless graphics card, it does have 4GB of VRAM. Not that it can use any of that VRAM, because this is from the era where they just shoved on 4GB of DDR3 and tried to pretend it was a better card. Either way, even with low settings here, we were only able to achieve 28 FPS on average. Now, if you're going into this with the perspective of you've got an 11-year-old pre-built PC and this is what you can run on it, then it's not actually too bad and you could probably get away with it. But in terms of actual costs today, I reckon you could probably throw together a better system than this for the same money spent. Either way though, this was what I'd call just about playable if this is your only option. When it comes to really new indie titles though, like Tiny Glade, well, even in 768p you are not going to see a very good frame rate. You could just push it slightly higher than this when you drop things down to 640 by 480, but the game becomes unplayable. The only thing we can give the system here though is that the frame rate was relatively stable, so even though it was only running at 21 FPS most of the time, it's a type of game that you could play it like this. It didn't look fantastic, but once we enabled GPU scaling and had a native 768p image, well, I kind of enjoyed playing it and I got probably a bit too much footage of me actually testing it. So Tiny Glade will work, but 20 FPS is as good as it will get. But how could I test a system like this without going through a couple of indie games? And of course, Project Zomboid using medium settings in 1080p went to show that even though this game has got a lot more intensive than when this PC should have been playing it, it's still keeping up with it relatively fine. Now, don't get me wrong, the Core i3 does chug a little bit when you zoom out on the map and it tries to load everything in, but once it's loaded everything in, you go back to seeing probably around 60 FPS most of the time. Our average overall was 52 FPS with 1% lows brought down to 39 FPS by this stuttering that would occur when you zoomed out, but for the vast majority of gameplay, Project Zomboid was still relatively playable and actually very enjoyable. And this one was just for me to make sure that Bannerlord is still the pinnacle of optimization, because with a mixture of low and medium settings, we finally saw what is a new 3D game running in 1080p, and it looked really rather decent, although the lack of shadows was slightly off-putting because the graphics card really just couldn't handle it, and I will say the processor struggled with the shadows as well. Either way, Bannerlord did actually run, and given that this is representative of the late game, you could get away through playing virtually all of the game on what is now, frankly, a rather old Alienware PC. To give you an idea of how this actual computer used to run games back in the day, we have Skyrim Anniversary running with medium and high settings in 900p, and we saw 41 FPS on average and 1% lows down to 34 FPS, which would vary depending on if you're in a cave, a town or a city, or out exploring. Either way, it gives you the idea of how this PC used to run games. Medium and high settings and 900p in most games tended to be what you were going for. But finally, can it run Crysis? Well, it can, but only with high settings in DirectX 9. And why is this, might you ask? Well, it seems to be that Nvidia has completely broken Crysis on all of their graphics cards, even dating back to the 700 series with their new drivers. See, originally I thought it was just RTX cards and things like that were having problems, but no, this does confirm it, that even on cards as old as the 700 series, Nvidia's drivers for the last year and a half or so have been completely broken for Crysis and can only launch it in DirectX 9 mode. So as much as Nvidia has now relegated these cards to the bug fixes only pile, which is more than fair, this is an old graphics card, I've got no issues with the support this card has received, but please, Nvidia, please fix Crysis before you stop updating it. Overall performance then across the benchmarks was very much a little bit disappointing from that graphics card's perspective, but to see the i3 performing that well after how little I was expecting out of it after testing its Sandy Bridge counterparts, well, that part was at least quite entertaining to see. What is fascinating though is that I can understand why people rave about this a little bit now, because if this was the performance on the entry level, admittedly the entry level from 2015 onwards, then how much extra performance could you have got out of this? Because with an R9 270, well, we'd be seeing a lot of these games still playable, and that was an option for this machine. It's just a shame that we're stuck with that 745 card. But either way, the performance is pretty decent for what was a £40 pre-built, at least what it cost me. I wouldn't pay 150 quid for it, but £44, it'll certainly get some gaming done for you and look cool while it does it. You've probably already gathered by now that I've been using this PC as much as possible, and it works fine as a computer. There's no issues there. For some reason, these Haswell i3s are doing much better than expected when it comes to day-to-day usage. Now, don't get me wrong, you can still use a Core 2 Duo with an SSD and it will still work fine. And the SSD was the main thing that helped speed up the entire system. But I'd say overall, you could definitely get away with using a machine like this day-to-day. It is just very imperative that you upgrade the SSD, or the dying hard drive, sorry, to an SSD at least. I mean, you could get away with 6GB of RAM, because during day-to-day usage we didn't actually run into any problems with it. So you can actually get away with using this computer as a computer and not gaming and just doing your basic tasks like watching videos, going online, downloading programs, word processing, just using it as a basic computer. You could use absolutely fine out of the box, provided you aren't using a dying Western Digital hard drive. So it's nice to see that even these PCs that now are 11 years old, well, they're not obsolete when it comes to just being a computer. They are still good for that, and thanks to the form factor, they're actually quite convenient just to plonk down on a desk. In terms of the feature set of the computer itself, well, there's not really much else you can say about it. I mean, sure, you've got the old school surround sound ports on it, and you've got the USB 3 ports all over it, which is very convenient and is very nice. But when it comes to things like Intel's QuickSync, which was built into the processor, as we've already seen plenty recently, these older versions, even the ones included on what I believe is the Intel HD 4600 inside this processor, well, they just don't work in OBS or Handbrake anymore. Conveniently, the NVENC encoder, which is included on the GTX 745, who knows why the GTX 745 has one, but it does make it a rather competent media player card, so you can record gameplay with no performance hit to what you're actually doing, and you'll end up with an okay-ish quality. Now, when it comes to streaming and things like that, the quality does begin to go downhill quite quickly, but overall, you can still get away with using this PC for media work very easily. I mean, even the DVD drive on it, which probably hasn't been used in a very, very long time, did eventually fire into life, and we were able to actually enjoy DVD playback with no problems. Now, it wouldn't eject the disc, so I'd have to manually make the PC go through and eject it, but as a media center, well, it does still have quite a lot of media capabilities, and this is without even touching the graphics card, so I could definitely see this being a quality DVD player replacement, if nothing else. Now, of course, people are going to be concerned about the thermals, and even admittedly, I was a little bit concerned by how hot this thing could run, given that it is a very compact build. And keep in mind, this is a relatively lower power version compared to what actually came in these as some of the top-end specifications. I think some people even managed to cram RTX cards in these machines, and really that's got me excited to try and do something myself. But when it came to actual overall temperatures, when you're actually doing something basic like sitting at the desktop or doing a few applications, you were seeing mid-40s across the board. When it came to gaming, the graphics card was nearing in on 80 degrees, but then again, it has a very small cooler and I doubt it's ever had the thermal paste change, so I'd call that a really relatively decent result. It's only when you start getting things under full load that we were seeing something hit nearly 100 degrees, which was the GPU hotspot, which I'd imagine is where the cooler likely needs a good clean and repaste, was seeing 98 degrees under full load. So when it came to actual thermals, well, it really wasn't too bad, and the fans on this machine didn't ramp up once, so there is definitely some thermal headroom there. When it came to the power consumption though, well, it is actually still rather impressive with 31 watts at idle, 39 watts during video playback, 44 watts during general usage, but it does ramp up a little bit in gaming when the graphics card actually has to kick in and do something. It's also worth noting that these are the figures with an SSD in there which will be using less power than the hard drive. So during gaming we saw 72 watts of usage, and under a full load stress test we saw 96 watts under full load. So when it comes to power consumption, well, it still is rather decent even by today's standards, as we are seeing all this power in a sub 100 watt power envelope. Not that you can really make it go much higher than this because, well, the power brick only goes up to 130 watts anyway. So there we have it, my first actual Alienware PC. And I think I'm going to keep it, mostly because I got it for a really decent price, and this is also my first time I've ever actually properly owned something that is on the Haswell socket. Genuinely, I sort of skipped it completely. I went from AM3, dabbled around a little bit with Ivy Bridge, and went straight to Skylake. I've not really had any experience at all with Haswell because it's held its price so well. I mean, if there's ever a true testament that Haswell is still holding its price ridiculously well, then these PCs are definitely part of that, because looking through the eBay listings, I wouldn't pay much more than I paid for this computer. But I do understand why people do, because I'd imagine if you whacked a nice i7 in here, maybe a little bit more RAM, 32GB of it, a bigger SSD, and tried to get a high-end power supply which goes up to 330 watts, at least if we're talking official power supplies, you could throw in a rather decent RTX graphics card, at least a lower-end one, or my personal choice to add in here, the R9 Nano. That would be absolutely perfect for a system like this. So maybe we will do some upgrades in the future, and depending on what things go, I mean, this is my current Haswell test system, which is pretty cool. Anyway, thank you all very much for watching. I'd probably say don't buy one of these unless you really want an SFF PC that you can upgrade, but even then, there are definitely other options out there. Thank you very much for watching, and good night.